Okay, everyone, welcome. We are now going to continue the Thursday night class. It's going to be class number 3. In the discourse, we're learning Besha'ah Shehikdimu. This is not to confuse with the Lekutei podcast, which has also been learning Besha'ah Shehikdimu. But that's a different discourse, and that's from a different author, a great-great-great-grandson, but yet a different mimer. And it happens to be that we're learning both at the same time. That's by divine providence. In any case, we began this a few weeks ago before Shavuos. Last week we learned the second class, and now we're holding by class number 3. I forgot the name of the title of the class. What did we call it? Coming into contact or something like that with ultimate reality. That's what it was. I forgot the. I just posted in the title when I set up the broadcast, but I don't see it now. Sorry for the broadcast will not have the quality of sound like I usually have, and also not the camera. I'm not doing it in the shul in the center where we usually have the classes because the internet is down over there. Get that fixed. So I'm doing it at home. So and I don't have the same equipment over here. So we'll have to do with mediocre. But hopefully the class itself will be good. Okay. So we were learning in earlier. We were learning how at the time when the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma, we will hear a heavenly voice came out and said, "Who revealed to my children this secret that the angels use?" I understand what was so great about this, that God was so excited that we said we will do and we will hear. He asked the question earlier in the discourse, why do we make such a to-do about the giving of the Torah when the giving of the Torah was already, when the Jewish people studied Torah and had mitzvahs before already? And the sages tell us that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the patriarchs and matriarchs all kept the Torah already before. And then the other question, so what's so great about the event of Sinai? The other thing is, we know that by the event of Sinai, there was such intense revelation that it caused them all to die a whole bunch of times. And the question over here he asks over here is, God was telling them kind of simple things. He wasn't, obviously we understand it was great God revelation, but the question is, why was such great revelation necessary if all that God was giving was simple commandments? It wasn't like it was revealing some kind of cosmic secrets. Honor your parents is a very simple commandment. Thou shalt not kill, commit murder, and the like. Why the revelation? Why the intensity of it? So then he brought the concept of what it says that the wise, there's a few different sons that ask questions. You can listen to class number 1 and class number 2. We discussed all this. The wise son asks a question. What is the point of all the mitzvot? And we explained the question meaning. When the soul is in heaven, it cannot do all those mitzvahs. Why did God send the soul into a physical body and then command it in mitzvahs? What's the gain? The soul could have remained in heaven. This mitzvahs wouldn't be applicable because you don't have to restrain the soul from murdering someone in heaven when the soul has no interest in murdering anybody. There's no evil inclination. It seems like the whole thing is counterproductive. To take a soul, put it in a body where you're creating problems. And then to solve the problems, God gives us Torah and mitzvahs. Don't make the problem and don't have to solve the problem. That's his question. We were doing very well when we were above all the temptation and all the confusion and all this mess. So create a messy situation and then have the mitzvahs. That's the question he was been asking. So the answer that he began to develop is that the Torah is much more than just commandments. The Torah is a way that God communicates his very self to us. And as he explained, that in creation, God reveals only a tiny little minuscule nothing of himself. And all of creation is created from the nothingness of God, not from the somethingness of him. And that's the reason why it says, Yesh Me'ayin. We say the creation is something from nothing, even though God's energy was involved in creation, but the divine energy involved in creation is nothing to God. So it really is something from nothing. And but he explains God wants to get involved himself in creation, not just his little nothing of his energy that he puts into creation. He himself wants to humble himself and lower himself down into this world. And how does he do that? Through the Torah and through the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are called the limbs of the king. The Torah we discussed is called the blood. By the way, we have to know how to reconcile what we're learning in this discourse, this Besha'ah Shehikdimu, with the Elikus podcast that we're giving. Because over there we learned how Torah becomes specified and individualized to each situation. It modifies itself to each situation. If you're holding with us, Torah and mitzvahs is very all-inclusive. Here we learned the opposite. And mitzvahs are very much in relates to time and space. And Torah is like the blood that goes all over, and it's not stuck in a specific moment, in a specific time. So we have to actually compare the two and explain why in this discourse he sees it like this, and in this discourse like this, and how it's not a contradiction. I'm not going to explain that now because I have a hunch that a lot of the people learning this discourse now didn't listen to the Elikus podcast, that you have this problem right now. And if you do, then you got to somehow get a hold of me, and we're going to have to work it out together to get the answer. I know that myself, I was bothered when I was learning these two discourses that seemed to conflict. But the main idea that we're learning over here is that through Torah and mitzvahs, the Torah and the Mitzvot, we get to bring God himself down into this nothingness of existence, which is creation. That's what we learned. What's the purpose of that? The purpose of the revelation of God's very self through the Torah and mitzvahs down is that we should come to the true fear. And he explained that there's two verses. One says, he asks a question. There is a verse that says, fear God, Yiruas Hashem Kedosha, that his holy ones fear him. Implying that in order to fear him, you have to be very holy. There's another verse that says, Yiru Me Hashem, to fear from God, Kol Haaretz, the entire earth. Implying that the fear of God is applicable to everybody, not just to the extreme holy. So he pointed out, remember, this is class number 3, so I'm not going into detail into all of it. He pointed out, we learned this in class number 2, there's a big difference when it says Yiru Es Hashem or it says Yiru Me Hashem. Yiru Es Hashem means, Yiru Me Hashem means fear from God. God is the all-powerful, omnipotent creator, sustainer of life. Everything is in his hands. We tremble in awe in front of him. But that doesn't cancel a person's existence out completely. He is the super mega power and force of existence. Since he is the power of existence, he is the primary being in existence, and we should really, really, really respect and honor him and obey his will. That's called fearing of God, because it doesn't make us become utterly non-existent. But that's only possible if we're not really, really, really perceiving him. If we perceive only his energy flow into the universe, then we can fear of him. Fear Yiru Es Hashem. Es means, in Hebrew, the word es means when one thing is completely canceled to something else. So when you take a tiny, tiny little droplet of water, a tiny little spray, like you can hardly see it, and throw it into the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, that spray, little tiny bit of water has lost its existence totally and completely. It's a non-entity. So when we perceive God's true self, infinitely beyond being a creator of the creation, then we reach that level of fear. But in order to reach that level of fear, you have to be able to know him beyond creation. So to know him beyond creation, you can't do that from within creation. The only way to do that is when God downloads himself to us so that we can actually experience him. And when we experience him, then we become not in front of him. Then our existence becomes canceled completely. Not he is the super big and we are super small. We are not even. In other words, that level of fear, a fear that cancels us to the point that we don't exist at all. Now, some people will think that's negative. It's not negative because that's when we become included in him. We become canceled out of our own existence and we become of him part of his true existence. For that, only Torah and mitzvahs can take us to that place. And that's what it says. God commanded us all these commandments, liyira, to fear him. Even souls in heaven, that answers the question to the wise son, why the soul needed to come down to heaven. It's not that God gave us mitzvahs down here because we have negative nature, because we have evil inclination. And we, in order to be able to restrain our rage that we shouldn't murder somebody, God had to tell us don't murder somebody. That's not at all what the mitzvahs are. Although they make their way down to us in the most simplest commandments, it's not about what the commandment is, it's who is commanding, who are you connecting to. When God is instructing us these mitzvahs, he is communicating his very self to us. And he wants it to be communicated even to the most simplest of people, who will not, that he can't communicate himself in a very abstract revelation. Someone who is that can appreciate and understand simple rules and regulations. The simple rules and regulations are ever infinitely great and infinitely powerful because God is at the other end of the commandment. God is at the other end of the pipeline. And when you're doing the mitzvah, he is inserting his true self, not the self that creates the creation. Because that self that creates the creation is a little crumb of, a nothing of a crumb of him. That's not what we're talking about. God wants to get up and personal with us through his commandments. And that's what we learned. And that's what it means as holy ones. His holy ones are people who he downloaded his holiness to. Who does he download his holiness to? Those who fulfill the mitzvahs. They're the only ones who can fear him. Now, for most of us doing mitzvahs, we don't fear him. Because that download that was downloaded, we have never opened up the download. We've never clicked on those files. We don't have the capacity to click on those files. When Mashiach will come, we will be given the opportunity to click on those files. The moment we will click on it, we will go absolutely insane of fear and awe of the awesomeness of the infinite. It will instantly open up in us such an incredible consciousness of God's infinite presence and infinite light that we won't even know where to run and hide. Not to scare anybody, but that's the way it's going to be. And that's this higher fear. This is where we're holding. We learned a little further, but I'm going to go back just for the context so it should flow easier. And this great fear, we're holding, we turned over the page, Yud Gimel, and we're going on to page 26 on the Lekutei Torah. And this great, you can do it right away on the top of the picture that I gave you, Gedulazu, that all the will of God is revealed, the Gilui Rav Atzum, with this incredible revelation, at the time of the giving of the Torah, that's when we saw the godliness of the commandments. The very same revelation continues every time we do a mitzvah. It's just hidden from our view. To our soul, however, it's happening subconsciously. In the name of the Midrash Rabbah, you want water? In the name of the Medrash Rabbah, Perikov Taz Be'inyan, Ar Yesha'ah, when it says the lion roars, Mila Yira, who will not fear? Last week I told the story of being at the zoo and hear the lion roar suddenly. Literally made a hole in my pants. Like that's how frightening it was. I jumped like a. It was my little kids. It was so unexpected. It's like you're standing casually. You just, I don't know, you're eating potato chips. And it was like out of nowhere, boom. So that's when you got to. So the point of it is because you don't realize the lion. The lion looks like he's a creature, fine. So you turn around, you don't realize what kind of beast this is. So here we're talking about, obviously, God. And it says that the verse says, if the lion roars, who won't fear? The Midrash says that that's referring to God roaring on the top of the mountain. Because until then, God never really roared. You know, we knew him from a distance. He came down at Sinai. He revealed himself, and therefore, the Torah. It's referring to the giving of the Torah. Al Har Sinai, by the Mount Sinai, with thunder and lightning. And in every commandment, their soul took flight. So why did they die? They literally died. They died because every commandment was a communication of God, and for that reason, when they died, it wasn't just because it was overwhelming. Now we're getting a deeper reason. Not they died because they couldn't handle it. They were electrocuted. The power was too strong. That's not what happened. Or they died of ecstasy. It's all true. They died because the power was too strong. They died because of the ecstasy. The pleasure was unbearable. It's all true. But there's another meaning, which he's communicating over here. When you come face to face with God's existence, then you cannot be a being. Because in front of true existence, nothing exists but that true existence. So it wasn't just overpowering, overwhelming. It was total bittul. It was the state of Yiru Es Hashem. They became nullified to the point where they became non-existent in front of his existence. It was a realization that he is, and there's no other than him. There's no time and space. It's nothing exists. It's only his reality. And that's why the sages tell us, that's why the sages tell us also that during the giving of the Torah, the impurity that we've had from the days of Adam and Eve, from when Adam and Eve sinned with the tree of knowledge, what happened? When Adam and Eve sinned with the tree of knowledge, they became contaminated. The human condition became, in general, blurred. We ceased to see things truly. But what happened by the giving of the Torah? We had a great reset. They call it a reset. They had a great reset. The human being was reset to its original state. The original state was that God was going to be revealed to us. And we went back to that state. And that's Al-Tikra, and then there is no death. Because this is a very important idea. We're afraid to be afraid. We're afraid to be so afraid because we're afraid that being so afraid is going to stifle our existence. Actually, what it does is the opposite. There's a verse that says, Hain, it's a verse in Proverbs. It says, Hain Yiras Hashem, behold, the fear of God, l'chaim, is to life. When you fear God, then you live forever. Because there's nothing to sever you from Hashem. The severance from God comes when we don't fear him enough and we think we are somebody's as well. Then we step away from him. We step away from him, then inevitably there's no life because he is life. So the more we can become nullified in his existence, that gives us eternal living. So that's why it says, by this happened by the giving of the Torah, that the sages say when it says that the words of God, the commandments were engraved, the words it uses is charos. Charos means engraved. The sages say don't read it in charos, which means engraved. Read it cheros. Cheros means liberated. Liberated from who? From the angel of death. So hold up, and then why does it say engraved? The two of them are really are the same explanation. When we are something other than God, then we can either live or die. If we're alive, because we're receiving life from Him. In other words, life is not in our essential state. God lives. God is life. He is. So if we are nothing other than Him, then we live like who? Like He lives, because it's an essential feature of Him that He's alive. And if the more we identify to the point that our existence is Him, then He is alive. We are alive with Him because we are Him. But the more we sense ourselves separated, that very separation is what puts us kind of outside of Him. So then we could live or not, God forbid. You know what I'm saying? The whole life is very wishy-washy because it's something other that now needs to live. Okay, so but then life is very temporary. Life then is, well, let's put it this way, life then is circumstantial. It's not absolute. And now we understand the connection. The Torah was engraved in the stone. Remember what we learned in the last discourse we were learning? Engravement means that the letters and the stone are in which it's engraved are one. That would mean, what did it do to the people? It revealed their engraved, how we are all engraved in God. When we are nothing other than engravements in Him, He is forever, we are forever. So this lifted us up into the consciousness of engravement. And we are just, He is, that's it. And therefore they were freed from the angel of death, the shibud. They were also freed from enslavement. Which means at this point, once we are totally one with Him, we can't be enslaved to anything. Because He is not enslavable. And we are Him, so nothing can enslave us. That's why the Jewish people, in essence, were never, since we went out of Egypt, we will never ever be able to be enslaved anymore. Why? In essence, why? Because when we have this level of attachment to God, then you can't be subservient to anything. But this lasted, but that's in our essence. That's why tzaddikim are that way. Nothing can crush them. We're coming up now, we're in the period of time between the 15th of Sivan and the 12th of Tammuz, which were the days that the 6th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch, was incarcerated in Soviet Russia for his observance of Mitzvot. So I've been reading his diary. When you read over there, you realize you're dealing that this person was in the most dire, most horrific imprisonment. You can't even imagine such a dark dungeon, such a horrific, inhumane, monstrous place. Ruthless thugs were trying to subdue him. And yet, he mastered over them. One against thousands. They couldn't control him at all. Why? Because his godly soul was completely revealed. He was attached, because he's attached to God. In such a deep way, they couldn't everybody, it's worth really reading his diaries. There's 2 books that's worth reading in English. One is called The Prince in Prison, and the other one is called The Heroic Struggle. 2 books, which is now, it's a must read. Look them up online, you can order it. It's so encouraging to watch how a person is able to stand his ground against the most mightiest force. Didn't flinch. You can't enslave someone who is one with God, who is nullified to Hashem completely. So by the giving of the Torah, this happened to all of us. But when we sinned, we lost it. Tzaddikim are able to rise past the sin and restore themselves to that state. The Alkain, but once we sinned. So had we maintained that consciousness, and that state of the giving of the Torah, that reality, we would have kind of been already done with evil forever. And we would have been done with death forever. And we would have been done because everything comes from separation. Sin comes because we feel ourselves. You don't feel yourself, you feel only God's presence, you can't go against as well. It's when we feel ourselves. The feeling ourselves comes from, so and then comes death, and then comes subservience, and then comes all the other stuff that are. But so by the giving of the Torah, had we maintained that and never fallen into sin, and that's by the golden calf, then we would have been already ready for eternal life, for Mashiach, for the Jewish people playing their role as the leaders of the world, the teachers of humanity, and letting the world into this utopian state of existence of absolute union with Hashem, like it's going to be in the days of Mashiach. We would have had that 3,500 years ago. But we messed it up. We fudged. And because of that, we disconnected. And now God says, okay, that doesn't mean, now you got to drop. So basically we lost Sinai. We lost that vision. We lost that, what we saw then, we don't see it anymore. Sinai was a state of consciousness. It was a state of awareness. In other words, a complete different reality kicked in. They saw reality from a complete different place. We lost that. We went back to seeing the world as a world, time and space as an entity, as something. And then we have to struggle again with our egos. We have to struggle again with the false sense of I. But God says, you know what? You can take me bit by bit, little pieces. Bit by bit, download me day throughout your life. Every mitzvah you do, you're bringing in this higher reality into your soul. You might not be aware of it, but you're bringing it in day by day. And if you keep on doing it, all my mitzvahs, you'll see that your consciousness will become so much more godly, and the evil inclination would slowly but surely eradicate, will slowly but surely go away. And if we're learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and not sinning, see, every time we sin, we have a throwback. We bring the klipa back in. But if you don't let the sin come in and you maintain continuously observance, then you progress to a higher level of consciousness and you can bring yourself back close to Sinai. Not completely, but close. Tzaddikim, they can go there. And therefore, let me, because I like not skipping anything, I'm going to read the small little words here. There's a little parentheses where he gives a whole lot of places to look up. So I'm going to read it quickly. I'm in Perekei the Erevin. Look in 5th chapter of Masechtas Erevin, Daf Nun Dalet Seif Amud Aleph. Look over there. O Perek Vav, the Avos, Rabbis. Parshas Mishpatim, Reish Parshas Lamed Beis. Look in the 6th chapter of, it's two different things. 6th chapter of Avos, because it says, look in Medrash Rabbah, Parshas Mishpatim, Reish Parshas Lamed Beis. Over there it also talks about it. Kisisa, Perek Mem Aleph, Kuf Nun Vav Amud Beis. Look in Midrash Rabbah, Parshas Kisisa. So Perek Mem Zayin, okay, and Kuf Samach Aleph, Gimel and Dalet, okay. Pekudei Perek Nun Aleph, Kuf Samach Gimel Dalet. These are all places to look in Midrash. Mitzorah Perek Yudches, Kuf Pehei Amud Beis. Nosei Perek Yud, Daf Reish Mem Amud Aleph. Perek Yud Gimel Reish Nun Dalet Amud Aleph. The Karban Yisachar, where it talks about the sacrifice of Yisachar, tribe of Yisachar. It talks about the freedom the Jewish people received at the giving of the Torah. Shlach Lecha, this week's parsha. Perek Tet Zayin Reish Samach Zayin Amud Dalet. Zohar Chodesh Beis. Then look, until now was all midrashic sources. Now he's giving you Zohar sources. Zohar Chelik Beis Yisrei Perek Dalet Mishpatim Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph Tetzaveh Kuf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph Beshalach Mem Hey Amud Beis. These are three. How many places in Zohar? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sources in Zohar. And then Chelik Aleph Bereshis, Daf Lamed Zayin, Seif Lamed Beis, Chai Sarah, Kuf Lamed Aleph Beis, Vayikra, Davav Lamed Beis. Another three sources of Zohar. So altogether, 7 sources from Zohar and a whole bunch of sources of Midrash. Look all those places up, what it says about that the Jewish people became liberated from the evil inclination during the time of the Sinai experience. Okay, now we continue. But since we sinned and we had a throwback, we fell back. We fell back into limited creation consciousness, where the infinite is completely blocked from our perception. And therefore, we don't see him. So we only see him as a source for creation. If we do see him, we only see him as an energy force for the creation. We don't see God's bigger self. And therefore, we give too much credit to our own existence. So we're back in the shadows of death. And we're back in the ability to be subservient to any kind of force that can overpower us. So then what happens then? So then he says, guess what? So it's not like we give up. Then we work our way back to it. How do we do it? Every day, serving God, doing mitzvahs. Like it says, now how do we see that our mitzvah observance, hopefully in the end, eviscerates the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, just like Sinai did? Well, there's a verse that says, Ma'at ma'at agarshenu, little by little I will chase him away. You might not even notice it. You go your way learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, you're not even going to notice how you're changing. You're internally. And this was the greatness of Milas and Sinas Torah Yisrael, B'Shas Matan Torah. This is why the giving of the Torah at the time of the giving of the Torah was so great. It wasn't the commandments that were so important. It was the divine communication that was coming through them. And even though our forefathers also kept the Torah, however, it says by Avram, in other words, what he's going to say over here is that God never downloaded it. He never really downloaded the mitzvah to earth, which means the mitzvahs were still God's mitzvahs. Avram was mimicking God, but he wasn't downloading God. That's why it says, God says, I love him because he will teach his children. And then it says, he goes in my ways. Vayishmar mishmarti. He observes my observances. God is basically saying, at the time when Abraham was doing it, it was still my observance. It wasn't his. But now by the giving of the Torah, I'm making it yours, which means I am transmitting it to you. Observing my commandments. The mitzvah did not have that quality to download God down here on the earth. Begilui Rav, with great revelation, va'atzum, and kibishas matan Torah. In other words, God did not release the potency of the mitzvahs, the potency of the Torah, down into this world, like it was at the time of the giving of the Torah, where he did do that. And he didn't do that yet. So look in Midrash Shemos, where he speaks about this. Vayikra Seif Perik Beis, Shirashirim Rabba, B'Pasik Chikoy Mamtakim. Look at all these places. B'Gemara Yuma Chavches, Beis Nedarim Lamed Beis, Shilu Kedushim Perik Beis Amadav, Amishkam Zebder Masal Moshe Yadav. So look at all these sources where he explains the difference between Abraham's commandments and our commandments. Okay, now we go back. Dibur, and then what did God say? Okay, so now we know what was revealed. Hashem was revealed, but it was within the context of the commandment. What was the commandment? Dibur lo tirtzach. And when God said, "Thou shalt not murder," so what is the divine revelation of God saying, I want you to know me? What does it have to do with thou shalt not murder? So he explains, it should, when God said thou shalt not commit murder, what was he saying? He was allowing a download, a revelation of his will, lamata, below. Afilu binyanim elu, even in these simple observances, bishmiras loisasezu, with the observance of this prohibition. In other words, when one does not commit murder because God commanded in the Ten Commandments, the value of that restraint of one's own whatever otherwise rage or anger that would drive a person to the murder. Now, that's a great value. You have now, today they just announced in Oklahoma that the Ten Commandments must be taught as part of the school curriculum. By the way, that's a huge victory for holiness. Because God's commandments have nothing to do with religion. God's commandments is nothing. This is reality. So it should be taught to every human being. I know only religious people say it's reality, but that's not God's problem, that only religious people say that. He spoke to humanity and he told us you should not do this. And he wants it to, and God wants it to be. The truth is the Ten Commandments are not really what God spoke to the humanity. 10 Commandments are what God spoke to the Jewish people. But thou shalt not murder is one of the 7 Noahide laws as well. So this is for humanity. In any case, so the value of listening to this commandment is infinitely more valuable than just the value of the not taking the life of another human being. We might think, what can be more valuable than that? A person who, God forbid, almost got killed did not get killed. So that's like infinitely valuable. Well, yeah, that's true. It's very valuable. But if not for God's commandment, the value of that is whatever the value of that human being would be. Now, the value of the human being, I know we all like to say is priceless, but ultimately, a human being is a finite creature. So the value of the human is finite. Now, the reason why the value of the human is infinite is because God said, thou shalt not kill him. And God says, I want this person alive, not dead. And don't take his life. Oh, now God is taking an interest in the not killing. So now how important is the not killing? It contains God's infinite will. So that's a whole different story. Now it's infinity. So, but God's interesting. He could have communicated his will to us in a higher realm, yet he chose to communicate it in the most simplest elements of physical material life. Why? Because he wants to enter into our most physical and he even wants to enter, here's the point. God even wants to enter into the darker crevices of our being. Because if God would only communicate to us commandments, that would be speaking to our higher aspirations, to our higher selves. God would ask us to meditate on his unity, like he done on the first commandment. Meditate on my oneness. I am God, your God. You shall have no other gods besides me. So that speaks, in that sense, God reveals himself to us. Now, since these are God's commandments, they're as infinite as he is. So while by us meditating on him, yeah, but which part of us is meditating on him? Our more sublime self that takes an interest in that. But the darker features of the person. We all have a higher shiny self, and we also have we have a basement. In that basement, all kinds of dark stuff go on. And God says, I want to reveal myself even into that basement, in that cellar. So I'm going into the crass, coarse elements of your character, and I'm introducing myself there by telling you right in the spot where you might have the urge, the desire to, God forbid, murder someone, because your selfish self is so intense over there that if someone took your parking spot, it inflames you so much that you're willing to pull a gun, God forbid. And God says, I acknowledge that dark space within you, but I want to enter into that space. Who? The infinite wants to enter into that space. Knock, knock, I'm here. What? Don't kill. So now God has communicated his infinity into the darker side of self. And in the next commandment, he reaches into another dark spot. Thou shalt not commit adultery. That's the part of us, again, where we have all kinds of lustful desires. It's not kosher. It's not holy. It's a dark space. And God says, I want to fill that space too. And by you fulfilling, by you, it maybe would have considered adultery. So it's not so much even about the adultery. It's more about the fact that God is saying, a heart that has a lustful desire, I want to live in that heart. How can I live in that space? If I'm telling you, to be kind to people that are suffering. So I'm speaking to another part of your heart, to the space within your emotional self where you want it, where maybe you're kind or not kind, and I'm expanding that kindness. But I'm not speaking to the neighboring part of the heart where there is a dark space where there is a desire, where there is a lustful desire for adultery. And God says, I want to enter into that space as well. And who's entering? He himself. So not only is he revealing himself to the sublime elements within us, he's revealing himself in our most base animal side. And even there, he wants to reveal himself. The Indian, now, now, but even here, he says something about. He says, he says it's a difference. There's a very big difference. When God said, thou shalt not commit murder, and which was a revelation of his infinity, it was his will, infinitely higher than creation, then revealing himself via that commandment, as it was at Sinai, and as it is today. Remember, we said at Sinai, we actually experienced the godliness of it. Since we experienced the infinity of it, now when we observe it, it's being downloaded. We're connecting from God's end. We're connecting from our consciousness. It's not happening because all we can feel is the struggle. Right? You want to sin? No, I'm not going to sin. You want to sin? No, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. You do feel God that enough that He's commanding you, but you're not sensing that God Himself just walked into that space. Then you'd forget the lust in a half a second. You'd forget the rage in a second. You would die from ecstasy and delight, or not die, but we would be exhilarated beyond exhilaration. Who could ever think about the lustful thought? Who can ever think about the rage? Who can ever think about stealing something when God just entered? So when we're fulfilling the commandments, God is empowering us to overcome our basic negative impulses through the commandment, and by making that very space godly by adhering to the commandment. So now that space is now becoming, but we're not conscious of it. So it could be that tomorrow you fulfill the commandment today, tomorrow you come back to the same 10 commandments and you have again an urge to violate them. And you need so we hope that many, many times fulfilling it, slowly the evil will let go. Will let go, and your space will become more godlike. Even your cellar space, even your basement will become more godly, holier with divine presence, more sublimated. Fine. But by the giving of the Torah, since at the giving of the Torah, the commandments were very transparent. The godliness of the commandment was very visible and very open. So when God said, thou shalt not kill, He wasn't commanding. He was stating the fact. He was saying, thou shalt, in Hebrew, thou shalt not kill. The word lo tirtzach really means, let's change the word, not thou shalt not, but thou will not kill. Thou will not murder. Thou will not steal. What does that mean? That means I'm instilling my will in you I'm entering you, and when I enter you, you will never murder, you will never steal, you will never rob, you will never be deceitful, you will never. In other words, then he's stating the fact, he's not commanding. Because in at the Sinai, the revelation of these commandments was the revelation of godliness. Once God entered that, once God enters the person, they cannot steal. They cannot, meaning enter, I mean enter in a conscious level. So that's what he says. And the idea of thou shalt not kill, murder. Or, now, first of all, he says it doesn't only mean bloody murder. God forbid thrusting a knife into someone's chest. It doesn't only mean that. It means on many, many levels. So the commandment is more than just not taking the physical life of someone. The commandment extends to every time we take holy energy and cause it to leak into outside of its designated flow. What is the primary element of murdering in the Torah is spilling blood. Spilling blood means that blood, which blood is energy and life, it's supposed to flow in a person's arteries. God forbid you slice the artery, you puncture the artery, the blood goes out of the artery, and it causes great damage, and it can also cause death. Spiritually, we all have a flow of godly energy flowing from God's limbs. God is like an image of a human, which is God's limbs, God's flow into the universe, and from there it flows into our limbs. When, God forbid, we misuse divine energy, we take energy that's flowing to us for holy purposes, for godly purposes, and we use that energy for stuff that God did not ask us to use it for. So we're redirecting God's energy outside of its flow. That's in a very subtle way considered murder. So the commandment, thou shalt not murder, goes way beyond not just killing someone. Every sin, for sure, is a usage of energy outside of where God wants to use it. It's outside of God's limit. So every sin is considered murder, really. That's what he's saying over here. For we hold, it says, Shehikdimu adam ba'adam. It says in the verse, it says, the one who spills the blood of man into man. It's a verse in Parshas Noach. Simply over there, it means, what does it mean? This one who spills the blood of man into man. But the simple meaning, it means the one who spills the blood of man, ba'adam, amongst people. If a human being spills the blood of another human, that's the simple meaning. But the wording is a little funny. The one who spills the blood of man into man. But the deeper explanation that we're learning over here is, the first time it says in the verse man, it's referring to the holy man, the man of holiness. That's God being called man. Taking God's blood and pouring it into the forces of evil, pouring it into the man, the unholy man, which is the evil inclination and the forces of darkness. So you're spilling blood of holiness into the unholy. That's every time you're misusing godly energy that God gave us for the right things, to use it for the wrong things. God made one opposite the other. Adam b'liyal hu hayetzahara. The evil man, that's the evil inclination. Neged Adam de Kedusha. He's in the same shape of the man of holiness. To explain a little bit, the 10 Sefirot, the 10 attributes, are in the shape of a human. And we're a manifestation of that. When, God forbid, but the unholy also has a is also in the shape of a man. So when we're using holy energy and taking it outside, when our godly soul that has holy energy gets dragged into unholy activities, it's taking the blood of holiness and spilling it into the unholy. That's kind of the idea. But now the question is, how can you spill God's blood? If the man means the supernal man spilling God's blood, he says, well, that's because a Jew is so holy. Since the Jewish people are rooted in God's thoughts, so where they direct the energy, they're actually directing the flow of the divine blood through the divine limbs. We wouldn't be so high, we couldn't make such a mess. Because we're plugged in so high, we're able to, God forbid, misuse it. In Israel, all over Machshava, the Jewish people have risen in God's thoughts. And that's why through their sins, God forbid, they cause in action, in speech, and in thought. Whether the sin is an action, like eating something you're not supposed to, or any other action that's sinful, or speech, like telling a lie, or thought, when we think immoral thoughts or whatever it is. So even in the most subtle thing, like a little thought, that already constitutes b'chinas shvichas dam v'chayis adam de kedusha. One is causing in that the person is just having negative thoughts. So what's happening is they're pulling energy from a very holy place and pulling it out of holiness and dumping that holy energy into the unholy. That's called spilling blood. What the Alter Rebbe wants to show us is, although we think that the 10 commandments are all just basic physical commandments, they all also have deep spiritual meanings in which we realize that they're far more easier to violate than we think they are. Oh, I would never violate any of the 10 commandments. But once we start learning the deeper meaning of them, we realize that we're probably in violation of them almost every day. And that's a big problem. And the same as by other sins as well. Loitinaf. So loitinaf means do not commit adultery. So we all know what that means in the physical sense. Someone has a relationship with a married woman. That's adultery. Fine. So, I would never do that. So now he's explaining, but what really is happening in that? Well, meaning over here is when a person physically is doing that, that means they're taking their procreative energy and they're giving it, which is supposed to be used in a productive manner for God's sake to create children in a holy way in this world, and they're giving it to somewhere else. So what happens if someone takes, it's similar to spilling blood, but in a different idea, is when a person causes through their actions that holy hashpa, energy, holy influence that's supposed to come to holiness, gets transported into the unholy, it's again a form of adultery. You have to understand, so why is it different than murder? It's the same thing. Murder is the spilling of the blood. Here is spilling of, okay, so maybe this is more potent. Taking life itself, which you can create a whole human being with, and giving it to the unholy. Okay, so we have to understand, he doesn't give much explanation, how the spiritual meaning of sinaf, which is the general meaning of immorality, how that applies and how that's different than murder based on what we said earlier. Okay. Shouldn't cause shefa levatala, a flow of energy to go to waste, to the external forces. It's what a person is doing as an adulterer. He's taking internal energy and giving it into a vessel where it doesn't belong. And the same is also thou shalt not steal. Now stealing can mean, obviously, stealing meaning sticking your hand into someone else's pocket, robbing a bank. But stealing or being dishonest in business and pocketing money that you don't deserve. But it also means stealing stealing people's trust or stealing people's admiration by being being tzvius. Tzvius means being two-faced, pretending to be holier and godlier than you really are, and people therefore have a very higher people have a higher what would be the word? A higher not opinion, but what would be the good word? Not opinion. I'm looking for a good word. People think of you more than what you. No, so it says appraisal. That's not looking for a better word. In any case, so when someone is doing things to make themselves look better than what they are, or when you're doing things and it looks like you're doing it for the right purpose, you're doing things because you care, because you're good, because you're whatever, but really the intentions are for ulterior motive to make yourself a name, to make yourself to seek people's approval, and so on and so forth. That's in a sense stealing. It's being dishonest, right? And so what he's showing is that all these commandments are far more than just in its physical application. But here's the important thing. This is also important, but the main point that he's bringing out of it, Besha'ah Matan Torah, since at the time of the giving of the Torah, the godliness of the commandments, the fact that God is communicating himself to you, was very visible before they sinned with the golden calf. So they were suddenly elevated to this high level of revelation. So then in each commandment, when God commanded them not to do so and so, it was considered done. God kind of purged from them every bit of dishonesty automatically went left from them. God kind of said, thou shalt not commit murder or thou shalt not commit adultery. It became impossible for them to be able to transmit their energy elsewhere where it doesn't belong. Not only would they not do the sin in a coarse, crass way, but even the subtleties of it. And he's not even needing to command it. He's stating the fact. He's saying like this: if I am now transmitting myself into you, then you will be different. You will not do. In Hebrew, thou shalt not is also could be read, you will not. So the Besha'ah Matan Torah, at the giving of the Torah, hadibur ba'atzmai geyser, the commandment itself decreed. Oimer loy tirtzach, it said, thou shalt not kill, you should not commit murder. Pidish loshen asid, it means this will be the future. You will not. This will not be anymore in the world, or at least in as much as the Jewish people were concerned. This will not happen anymore. You will not murder. You will not commit adultery. You will not steal, which included all the nuances of not stealing. Basically, what did we say earlier? By the giving of the Torah, they became freed from the evil inclination. God purged it at when they received the Ten Commandments. He actually purged from them every single type of evil inclination. Well, earlier we said it happened to them in general. That's why they had no more evil inclination. Why? Because each particular facet of the evil inclination was purged by the giving of the Torah. Not because we destroyed it, God, because he elevated our consciousness. Once we felt God in this, and God was shown himself in, shined himself, shown himself into that crevice of the darkness of human behavior, it disappeared. Because where there's a little bit of light, the darkness goes away inevitably. Since the lights turned on, the evil wasn't there anymore. It happened automatically. But that was only then that the lights were on. Because the future and the commandment, both of them use the same terminology in Hebrew. That was what happened when God gave these commandments at Sinai, and we would have remained with that. Now, the truth is we couldn't sin anymore. So how did we sin? Then we say, well, we sinned, but then how did we sin? Well, the answer is like this. There's two ways to sin. One way to sin is natural inclination, impulsiveness. That became impossible by the giving of the Torah. There's another way to sin. And that's when the evil inclination comes and tricks you. It's when the Satan himself comes and creates a situation that's confusing and that no one understands what's going on, and he throws us off. The sin of the golden calf was not a sin that was just, suddenly they had desire for idolatry. No, their desire for idolatry got knocked out completely. It wasn't like they woke up with a natural desire for idolatry or for a natural desire for adultery. No. There was a situation where the Satan came and he pretended that Moses was died, and now they're left in the desert and there's no one to take care of. No, there was a confusion, there was a trickery. That was deception. It was a trickery. It was a mirage. The whole reality suddenly became distorted, and that's how he got in. God gave him permission to do that because we were not really ready for the ultimate state of rectification. Had we really been ready for it, then he wouldn't be able to trick us. The reason he was able to trick us was because we were not ready. Why were we not ready? Because the great godly consciousness that we achieved by the giving of the Torah was never ours. It's not like we worked our way to that level of consciousness. It was because God removed the filters. He did it. He took away all the barriers that make up our finite, limited time-space existence that makes us feel so separated. For some moment, God suspended the rules of reality, of world-like consciousness. Okay, so we were godly, but it's not godly because we were godly. It was godly because God made us godly, and that's why it was not meant to be. So the same God made us godly, God asked the Satan to go and try to make them back human, make them back, and it worked. Not that God asked Satan, but he allowed him to do so. For our benefit. Because if we would be godly, not because we are godly, but we would be godly because it would never be ours. It would always be a superimposed state of existence that's never true to who we are. So we have to go through the long, difficult, treacherous journey of self-discovery. Working our way in the dark, slips and falls, generations upon generations of humans' achievements and failures, and so on and so forth. Until, and keeping the Torah and the mitzvahs, bit by bit, trickling in higher truth into the human consciousness. Until when Mashiach comes, we are really there. We have to burrow through. That's what he's saying over here. But after the sin, now it needs our work. So how do we do the same? If God says, thou shalt not murder, and the purpose of that is to introduce godliness there so that it one day will come a time when no one will be able to murder. It won't be out of the question. It will not have it. It's not that you should not, but that you will not. So how do we get to it? Not through the God's commandment, but through us uttering that commandment daily. When we say it again and again and again, millions of times, which are so beautiful that they're hanging it up in all the schools in Louisiana, by it being pronounced, by it being said, by it being stated, that itself affects the world. But it's through us. As he says, through our speech. Torah, we speak the words of Torah. With these infinitely potent, powerful energies contained in them, we draw down little tidbits of that download, of that full, powerful commandment. From his supernal will. I put my words in your mouth. So when someone studies Torah, God is now speaking through them. However, since he's coming through our tiny little mouths, it's a tiny little bit of the commandment that's coming through. But through this, through enough Torah study in the world, what's going to happen? The sinners will disappear. What does that mean? Sin will go out of style. Sin will become innately unappealing and uninteresting. It will just leave. So when you're watching in the world certain sinful movements that are so loud, it's so loud because the rest of humanity is looking at it and saying, "Are you crazy?" So it's feeling so threatened, so it has to be so loud and so much in everybody's face and so much rah, 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 rah. Why? People sinned all, for thousands of years they were sinning and didn't have to keep on get validated a million times with flags and with all kinds of pride and all kinds of mishigas. If you want to sin, go ahead, sin. People are starting to sin now. People have been sinning from the day one since the world was created. Can't continue. The answer was people were comfortable sinning a long time ago. Now no one is comfortable anymore. So until you don't validate it a million times and keep on telling him you're okay, you're good, then so you're seeing it's because it's exiting, it's leaving, it's on its way out, it's expiring, it's in its death throes. So it makes a lot of it. We shouldn't get disheartened when we see all this noise of sin, and all the stuff that are against God's will, that are making such a ruckus and so much noise. It's not a sign of it being strong. It's trying to resurrect itself and keep itself alive when it's dying. And the reason it's dying is because God's will is becoming so permeated into the human consciousness across the entire world. And so many people want to live the godly life. And it's becoming natural. It's becoming ingrained in people. It doesn't make the newspapers. What makes the newspapers is but that's fine. Evil and sin will go away from the earth. So we just keep on learning Torah. We keep on repeating it and teaching it. And it slowly evaporates. That's the point. So we got it all in one shot, and now it's instead been it's a process. Now the written Torah, Eitz Chaim is a tree of life, to those who hold on to it. The Torah Shabbat Peh, and the oral Torah, Nikra B'Zohar, is referred to in Zohar as Elon the Tovara, as the tree of good and evil. We know that in the garden there were two trees. There were a lot of trees, but there were two trees that get all the attention. One was the tree of life, which if you'll eat that, you'll live forever. And the other one was a tree they were forbidden to eat, called the tree of knowledge, because there was the knowledge of good and bad. And they ate and they messed up. So now it's a strange thing. Regarding the Torah, we know that the Torah is called the tree of life. However, the Zohar points out Then when the Torah is the tree of life, that's only the written Torah. The oral Torah, which is the rabbinic ordinances and all that, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Zohar, and all that's all part of the oral Torah. All of that is called the tree of good and evil. How can it be? That means that the Torah has evil in it, and that would also mean we would not be allowed to eat from it. Would be forbidden to learn Mishnah. So he's explaining, because it's not, the Torah itself is not the tree of good and evil. When we say the Torah is the tree of good and evil, means the oral Torah is the part of the Torah that descends into the mixture of good and evil and sorts things out. The written Torah remains aloof, doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of the darkness. The oral Torah gets into every little crevice of darkness to separate the good from the bad, to decree this behavior is okay, this is not okay. This is kosher, this is not kosher. That's how you separate the goods from the bad. This accumulation of separation that eventually makes God's will the reality in this world. That man can only choose good, they can't choose evil anymore. This very, 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 this powerful purifier of human consciousness, which is the Torah, that's called the tree of good and evil, because it goes into the mess, the human heart, which is mixed good and evil, to straighten it out. Like by way of analogy, when one studies the laws of non-kosher and non-kosher in an animal, the Elu Ksheris, this is in Tractate Chulin, discusses, in order for an animal to be kosher, the animal has to be a healthy animal. If an animal has a certain defect, when the animal, and which according to Torah means that the animal couldn't live for more than a year, if you take that animal and you slaughter it, the animal is not kosher meat. Even if you slaughter it according to Torah law, it's still not kosher. Even if it's a kosher animal, it's not a pig, it's a cow. Now, this doesn't have to confirm with medical science. You don't have to speak to a veteran who knows the health of an animal. The sages were the ones who lay out what's considered a defect, which will cause the animal to die, what not. And the sages had this as with a clear tradition. So it goes through much discussion, every type of ailment an animal can have, which would deem the animal not kosher. But he says, okay, now how many of us work in a butcher shop? And how many of us are busy with this thing? This is important for some people to do, to know. Those engaged in kosher slaughter, those who prepare kosher meat. But if you are a banker, or if you are a salesman, if you work at a store clerk, if you are a shoemaker, if you're a whatever you are, say, this is totally irrelevant to me. I don't have to learn this. I don't have to know this. But we know, no, the mitzvah to study Torah is on everybody. And everybody should be learning these laws. We're going to actually be learning this in Rambam now. In the next few days, we're going to start learning this. So why? Because when you learn this, what happens? One separates between the kosher and the non-kosher. And what happens is, in the world, the forces in the world that pretend to be righteous and good, but it's only a fabrication. They're hiding behind righteousness, yet they're full of lies and full of deception. What causes them to be exposed? The study of Torah. When Jews study in a yeshiva, Masechtas Chulin. These animals kosher. This looks kosher, but it's not kosher because we can expose this blemish. This has ramifications on a much greater scale than we think it does. It causes certain forces that pretend to be kosher to be exposed. Because once you say it's not kosher, it will cause in human consciousness a recognition of what's right, what's wrong. Sometimes you see within the world, you see as time passes, the general public starts to mistrust certain things that they've been believing in so much and realizing that this what they've always believed in is really full of self-interests, for taking advantage of them, and so on and so forth. And suddenly they're not going to support it. How did it suddenly change? What caused it? You can say because so-and-so wrote a book. You can say because so-and-so opened up a talk show. You can say because so-and-so was exposed. I'm sure these things help. But goes much deeper than that. The work that is done on a deep spiritual level to separate the right from the wrong, the kosher from the non-kosher, creates a distinction, and it causes that which is dark and evil and ugly to speak its ugliness and not hide it and not camouflage. And that causes it to be identified, and people don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. So these are very, very important, powerful forces, as we're learning over here. The study nasa bitter v'avdala beinatam letar, the yispardu kol payali oven, and all those who do evil get separated. Kihim es doinag mipnei eish, like wax melts before fire. What does he mean by that? The fire is when you're learning Torah, you're speaking the word of God. You're downloading the word of God at Sinai, and that's and where God is present, evil melts. And when will we see the culmination of all of that? When will all that have reached its fullest extent? Ad Yemoisa Mashiach, until the days of Mashiach. Sheyav v'ruach hatumah min haaretz, that the spirit of impurity should be removed from the earth. In the days of Mashiach, the spirit of impurity will be removed from the earth. And it says, on that day, God will be one and his name will be one. That means God will be one down here in this world. And his oneness of above will be unified with the oneness below. This is the mitzvah. Now here's the thing. In the days of Mashiach, we will experience this. We will see things down here below. We will see the unity. We will see a world completely enveloped in godliness. Obviously, everything in the world will be set in accordance to God's will. Everything else that was not in sync with holiness and godliness will be inevitably, it doesn't have to be destroyed by some Armageddon. It will be rejected by everybody, because truth will push away evil. So that's the meaning wisdom. In those days, eye to eye we will see. Now our vision, meaning until Mashiach is fully here, our vision perceives reality different than God's reality. He sees that it's all him, nothing but him. We see a whole lot of other stuff. After the purification that goes on as a result of this thousands of years of pumping godliness into the world through Torah and mitzvahs, we will then look eye to eye. Well, in the times of the past, on a mini level, on an individual level, or on a collective level, but only to the Jewish people, we experienced this when we would go up in our 3 pilgrimage holidays. Because when you went to Jerusalem and you walked into the Holy Temple, you had divine vision. You saw suddenly reality completely different. It was the world that seemed to be an obstruction on godliness. When you walked into the temple, you could see God everywhere and everything. Entire paradigm shift. Everything was seen differently. That's the meaning, like it says, just like a person comes to be seen, so they see. That's what it says. The verse says, you should come be seen. The sages say, just like you're coming to be seen, you should also come and see. What does that mean? Just like when the eye looking down at you, God looking down, sees the godliness of us, we too, we will look at ourselves and at everything else with the same godly perspective like God is seeing. So that was in a minuscule, in a limited fashion, because we weren't yet in the days of Mashiach. So every time we would come on the pilgrimage holidays, we would have another preview of Mashiach. Why? Because God would probably be showing us the updates. As we were downloading, you would get to see like what we fixed already, what was repaired since the last holiday, and how that particular aspect of existence is now filled with God's light. And since we were staring at that frame, we saw that frame was already fixed. So even though there's a whole lot of frames still that were not fixed, but we didn't have to see all that because that's not part of our work then. At that time, we came to the Holy Temple, we saw the frames that we fixed, and that we saw a very godly world. And that's the meaning, it's just like a person came to see Kachbo, that's what we saw. Just like from God's perspective, looking down. All before him is not. So it's from below as well. We should see it as well. This is the meaning when it says eye to eye, we will see. That the eye from below will see like it is above, and it will be equal. The eye from above. Look in the Maimer, when it says you should make what is straight in the eyes of God. Simply it means that you should always live your life in accordance, that you should gain God's approval. The deeper meaning is that you should see eye to eye. The last time I taught this discourse, not this one, but that one, in Devarim, I had this amazing story that I took a hike on Friday right after I taught this. And I came up in Griffiths Park over here, came up to a place, was with my daughter, who had a baby today. We went hiking then. She used to be my hiking companion. And she would do videos. I would do these short little videos. And we got up there, we said, let's do a video. And we came to a bench. And I had this whole Torah that I was going to teach about the vision below should be the same like the vision from above. That's what I was going to talk about. That's what I was thinking on the mountain, to give over what I learned the night before. Suddenly we come to Griffiths Park, and I come to this, I forgot where name even, I know the name of the place. I forgot. It's a famous, beautiful bench that's high up in the mountain, in the Hollywood Hills. And this is God's filling Hollywood. It was so cool. I come there, and what do I see? That the bench that we were going to sit and take the film was full of graffiti. And the graffiti has the word I, not I, capital I, EYE, 1,000 times I. And I was going to talk about our eye should be the same like God's eye. And then it was another word. It wasn't just I. It was I. What was it? It was literally this whole concept. And then I realized that what was like so crazy. I realized that whoever made the graffiti on the bench. You see, a graffiti scribbler, someone who goes into public property and puts their graffiti on something, is one of the most destructive forces in the universe. It's one of the most darkest things in the world. If there's, there's worse crimes than that, but usually, why are you making the world so ugly? If there's a nice mountain here with a nice bench, why would you, be so irresponsible and so unthoughtful to other people and put your graffiti on? But what was so crazy? What was so crazy? What was so crazy was that when I'm standing on top of the mountain by that bench after I taught this, I was shown by God something very amazing. I was shown the very message was written. The graffiti was that message. But this said something about all the graffiti writers. What did it say? It said that these guys who are writing graffiti, and when I say graffiti, I mean all the people that are scribbling on this beautiful world. And I don't mean only scribbling graffiti. If you're not being productive in a good way for the world, but adding graffiti, scribbling, whatever that is, whatever type of destructive behavior that is, from our perspective, it's destructive. From God's ultimate perspective, even that is part of his unity, because they're writing godly graffiti. Because they too are part of the divine truth being revealed. It's just that from the limited perspective of human perspective, there is what is godly and there's what's outside of godliness. These graffiti guys, they're really outside of godliness. But suddenly I realized, hey, that's the whole point, eye to eye. That we get to see what he sees. From God's perspective, everything is part of the unity. So even man and even man's evil choices are also part of the unity. So usually we don't see it. But then when I got elevated and climbed the mountain, I was able to see from a higher place because I studied this the day before. Eye to eye. So we have to be able to see eye to eye. As a result of all the mitzvot that we will do, we will suddenly see eye to eye. We will see pure, how everything is all him. Now, when the temple is not standing, we say, we're not able to see and we're not able to bow. So I understand when we say we're not able to see, makes sense. Because we don't have today, the world is dark, godliness is hidden. Yes, I had that one moment on top of that mountain where it was like the heavens opened up and I saw one of the darkest things. I can see how it's only him. It was a beautiful moment. I don't know why I deserved to have that moment. It was such a suspect. Maybe I didn't deserve. I just got a little gift. It was great. So I saw, and I was able to share it on a video. I called it Holy Graffiti. It's great. I loved it. That was one of the most memorable moments. So nice that I'm thinking about it today because my daughter was the one who really caught on to it. She was the one who saw it before me. I didn't see it. She saw it. She figured, she said, eye to eye. This is what you just spoke about. I didn't even see it. She saw it. And when I spoke on that video, I explained why I had to see through my daughter. With malchus, purification, whatever. It was cool. But so we understand that today's days, generally, we don't have such a vision. Today's days, we see a lot of stuff, and the stuff is dark, and the stuff is not godly, and the stuff is an obscuring ungodliness. And we ourselves become lured by evil inclination and evil temptation to forget about God. So we understand that today we can't see. But why can't we bow? Everybody can bow. Bow. If you want to bow, bow. Okay, if you don't want to bow, don't bow. But if you want to bow, we're saying we're not able to bow. Why can't you bow? The answer is, of course, we can physically bow. But we say to God, we can't see and we can't bow. Because to physically bow means nothing. It's what the message, it's the feeling. Bowing down to God means kneeling to God. It means, by the way, that when they would bow in the temple, they bowed. In Jewish tradition today, when we bow down during prayer, we just bend our body. That's all. The Muslims get on their knees and bow. So we do that also on Yom Kippur. On Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we get on our knees. Jews usually don't do that in our prayer, but on the high holidays we do. But even that is not the way we bowed in the temple. When we bowed in the temple, we actually went flat completely. We were laying down on the floor with our heads on the floor, like literally like laying down flat. It wasn't like your knees were up, like just total flat. That was an experience. What was the experience? At that moment, we became so sharply aware that God is the only reality that we could not stand anymore. Standing means in an upright posture means that you sense and you're aware of your own presence. Bending down means you feel your presence, but you feel your presence is subservient to something else. That's bending down. Kneeling on the floor is an expression that you feel very subservient, but you still occupy a little space. When you're lying flat on the ground, you're basically saying that you don't exist. If you're able to get underneath the earth and not be there at all, you would do that too. But it's just that, obviously you can't do that. So you're not going to bury yourself. So it's almost the point is you dissolve from existence. That can only come on a moment of such clarity that God is and there's none but him. Well, we can't have that experience only in the temple. So we can make monkey business and bow down, but it's nothing. It's clowning around. That's what we're saying. We can't bow. The reason we can't bow is because we can't see. They had vision, so they can see. They were truly humbled. They can see. What did we say in the beginning? Yiru es Hashem. To fear God to the point that you are es Hashem, nullified to him completely, Kedoshav, you have to be holy. So they stood in a place of holiness. They felt it. Holiness means where God is revealed. Where God was revealed, they felt it. Through the mitzvahs, we bring it down continuously, and eventually when Mashiach comes, that will be our state of consciousness all the time. So as we say, he says, we're not able to see and to bow down. And the reason we can't see, because of our sins. Because your sins separate between you and God. And the person's sin, the sins create a cataract on the eye. Just like a person has a cataract on the eye they can't see, a sin creates a cataract on the spiritual eyes that we should be able to perceive truth. Between your eyes, and that God's vision and our vision is not the same. Which causes when God sees that he can't communicate with us because we're not seeing eye to eye. We just don't get him. We don't see the world like he sees it. It causes him to want to stop communicating. So what happens is he withdraws. Like it says in Zohar, that God withdraws from his revelation down here. Hashem retracts upward. That means his revelation is not on earth, like in the temple. He goes away. And the river dries up. The river of divine consciousness becomes dry, very dry. And the sages say that this verse that says a river dried up, it says two words, Yacharav became semi-dry, the Yavish dried completely. Yacharav Abayas Rishon. When the first temple was destroyed, it became dry, but left a little moisture left. The Yavish Babayas Sheni, when the second temple was destroyed, it dried up completely. Shafilu b'b'chinas Bayas Rishon, b'chinas Bereshis, Nama Maimer, b'chinas Chachma, Yacharav Yistalik. Wow. He's reading when he says the first temple was destroyed and the last temple was destroyed. And these are two levels of drying out. He's explaining it on a spiritual level as well, not just that. Since there's no temple, there is a retraction. It becomes, we don't feel God, but he's saying it on a deeper level as well. Bayis Rishon, the first house, is referring to the first temple, but it's also referring to a state of in the attributes. The first of the attribute, the Rishon of the attribute is wisdom, Chacham. The latter attributes, which are the emotions, they're called acharon, because they come second. Like in a human experience, first there is the mind, intelligence, and then comes emotions. So which one is first? Rishon would be the intelligence, acharon would be emotions. When he says that the verse says it became dried in the first temple, it means that God dried the flow of divinity, retracted even from Chachma. It's like when a person experiences brain freeze. There's no vitality in the mind. So God's mind as well, God flows into the creation through the attributes. When the divine mind froze up, there's a retraction because the infinite left the attribute of Chachma. If he left even Chachma, then for sure he left the latter house, Bais Achron, emotions. Because emotions come after God is revealed in Chachma. He extends that revelation into the emotions. But if he retracts even from Chachma, then for sure, and that's why Chachma becomes dry, but semi-dry. There's still a little bit of life there, but the heart became the divine heart, which means God's manifestation into the emotional realm, became completely dried up. Why? It's like because when you want to communicate, you want to have a relationship with someone, and the other one is not responding, and the other one is just not answering to your reaching out, or you're telling them one thing and they're not tuning in. After a while, you say, "What do I need this for?" Then you pull out of the relationship. And God pulled out of the relationship with the world because there was a lack of engagement. That's what sin does. So, so how do you return it back? Point of here is not to make us feel heavy. Now it's dependent on repentance. Through Teshuvah, and good deeds, the light should be re-revealed again. And the way one can reactivate the light when one becomes a little embittered with oneself. When a person makes a calculation. In Egypt it was. It says that they became, in Egypt it says that when did the people cry out? When the Egyptians embittered their lives. Right? So that has a physical meaning. It became very bitter. But in our own lives, when we're in exile, who are the Egyptians that embitter our lives? It's we have to come to an understanding of how bitter and pitiful we are. Because as long as a person is kind of thinking that they're in a good space, they don't become bitter about it. When you start learning what we learned today, you realize how far we are, how distant we are from true what it was really meant to be. Then we can stop becoming bitter about the sins that we do. Not talking about even if someone doesn't do any big sins, but the subtleties. Because you ask yourself the question, why am I not flowing? Why am I not feeling incredible divinity all the time? Why am I so dry? That must be because I've caused God to lose interest in wanting to engage with me. Because I'm probably just not paying attention. Become a little bitter. If you're in love with someone and you realize suddenly that their heart, that they're not there anymore, it's your fault. They're not there because, they asked of you so and so 1,000 times, and every time they did, you ignored them. Then you're wondering why their heart is not there. So what happens to a spouse is, if they just don't do any introspection, their marriage will go down the drain and they'll end. But if when they start realizing that there's a certain distance and it starts bothering them, then you'll start asking yourself the question, why is it, what could it be that's causing my love to be less loving and less into it? Instead of blaming the other person, maybe ask yourself, what is it that I have done that have caused you to feel so distant from me? That's what God's same thing. And that's the meaning. When one becomes bitter about the situation, when you allow it to bother you, then va'azayan, then zachu, then you can cry out. Then it pains you, and when you cry out, v'tal shavasan al Hashem, their cries rose up and went up to God. Kitzer, he does a summary. Shetachlis inyan ha'Torah v'amitzvos liyiras Hashem. The point of all of Torah and mitzvahs is to fear God. Yiru es Hashem kedoishav. V'hainu akilui, which means the revelation. Kamoisha lamayla hayesh ulamata ka'ayin ve'efes. Just like, what's the revelation that we're talking about? Just like above is the real something, and below is not. Mamish, that should be felt in our experience. Canal. The Piddush L'cha Hashem Agdula, how all the attributes are nullified to God. The Gilui Zahai B'Shas Matan Torah. By the time of the giving of the Torah, they experienced that revelation. This is what we have that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't have. And then he explained, Lo tirtzach, lo tinaf. You will not kill, you will not steal. Doesn't mean you shouldn't commit adultery or you shouldn't murder. But Lashon Tzivo, it's a commandment. Lashon Avtacha means also a promise. This is the way it will be. The Achshav, and now, Abidai de Dibur Torah. Now, then it was, God stated the fact, and it would have been that way. But now, since we sinned, we need to make it happen slowly. We need to we have to bring back the revelation of that happened at Sinai. What we're basically doing is we are bringing the world back to its Sinai revelation. We're reenacting it piece by piece. It's a big job. It's thousands of years. It's through our speech of Torah, and this is the meaning also. The way you came to see, so you were seen, or the way you were seen, so you came to see, was to bring ourselves to that vision. That he says we're not able to bow because there is sin there. That's why we're not able to. And then he says, in Teshuvah, there is Teshuvah that restores it. So this is, we just learned, completed chapter 3. I'm going to stop over here simply because I didn't prepare anything I taught today. And I was traveling. And next week, we're going to be back in full swing, finish the discourse, hopefully, next week, Thursday night. Mashiach be here before. That's what Hashem.